So this is one of the craziest New York stories I've ever heard. It starts in Brooklyn, and in 2010, beekeeping became legal in New York. Gets to halfway through the year, it's a super hot year. And the beekeepers start noticing that their honey is turning this like really bright red. No one knows what it is. Some people think maybe it's parasites or pollution, but it's an absolute mystery. The honey apparently tasted terrible, and the beekeepers were having to throw away their harvest. No one knows what's going on. And finally it gets to September, and one of the beekeepers has just like had enough, and he sends off his honey to get tested. He comes back and it has tested positive for FD&C red number 40. That might seem random, except that it's a key ingredient in maraschino cherries. And there happened to be a particularly large maraschino cherry factory in Red Hook in Brooklyn. I know, probably thinking, well, that's where it ends there. It was obviously the cherry factory that was making the honey red. But it's actually where this mystery begins. So this factory is like an OG Brooklyn factory. It's family run. It's from the 1940s. Supplies restaurants like TGI Fridays and Red Lobster. Anyway, the guy that runs it is a 57-year-old man named Arthur Mondello. Third generation to run the business, and apparently everyone loves him. As a family man, maybe rough around the edges, but always giving people second chances, helping them out with loans. Very highly regarded. So anyway, it comes out that the cherry factory is in fact the cause of the red honey, and the Times writes a hugely popular article about it. Something about the article resonated, like the OG factory roots of Brooklyn versus like the new hipster beekeepers. But amongst all of this, Arthur Mondello himself is extremely quietly works with the beekeepers to stop the bees from getting into the factory. But he declines to comment for any articles, and he very much leans away from the press. But inevitably, all this press raises the profile of the factory. Around the same time, a few rumors start surfacing about the factory. People mention that maybe it's growing marijuana and maybe it's illegally dumping sewage. No one is able to prove anything, and for a year or so, it really quiets down. Then in 2013, the Brooklyn gets a new DA, and they decide to look into some old cases. Ultimately, this investigation culminates in a raid of the factory by the Department of Environmental Protection, NYPD, and officers of the DA. For the first 5 hours, Arthur Mondello completely cooperates. And then about 5 hours in, the officers say that they're smelling marijuana, and they find a wall that looks suspiciously fake. Mr. Mondello immediately excuses himself to his private bathroom and refuses to come out. He demands that they get his sister. When she comes, he tells her to simply look after his kids. He then proceeds to use a pistol, which is around his ankle, to unlive himself. Very sad, extremely surprising. At some point, the investigation is continued. The officers go through what was in fact a fake wall. They go down a hole which has a ladder, and they find a huge underground marijuana plant. 2,500 square feet, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, and multiple luxury cars. The most surprising thing at all is why Mr. Mondello chose to take his life. People think that he would have gone to prison for a couple years, and the fine that he was ultimately charged, he had totally enough money to pay. Anyway, this factory still exists today. So if you want a little piece of New York history in your next cocktail, make sure it's a Del Maraschino cherry.